So I woke up today feeling a bit pensive. I guess more pensive than usual, all things considered. I was thinking about what we know of as truth, right? That question popped into my mind after I watched a documentary called The Social Dilemma on Netflix. It was basically showing how social media influences our behavior, our actions, and is more or less leading to, or I should say, contributing to the polarization that we're seeing in America, and I would argue around the world, right now. And what was interesting to me was the fact that what the documentary, in my opinion, failed to mention is that, while you're pointing the fingers at people who believe in conspiracy theories, the other fingers kind of point back to us, the rest of us who believe in what is considered sort of, the conventional truth. And when I say truth, I put truth in question marks because at the end of the day, what we all collectively believe in as true, or I should say what the majority believes is true, isn't necessarily the actual truth. Yeah. I'll come back to that. When I speak of people who believe in conspiracy theories, they're not stupid people the way the media wants to sort of portray them as, stupid. These are people who are, I believe, naturally inquisitive and not apt to just readily accept what they've been told as real, and that's just, or as true rather, and that's just how their brains work. These are just naturally inquisitive people. They're predisposed to challenging authority, challenging the status quo. And then what happens is they get exposed to, on social media, what seems plausible, what seems true, and then they believe it, and then their actions follow suit. So if a person believes wholeheartedly that a person named Q is really working within the deep state to overthrow the government, and somehow Donald Trump is this, persona that's gonna make that happen, to people who don't believe that sounds absolutely insane. But the people who genuinely believe that is truth to them, as what you believe is true. Does that make sense? These aren't crazy people. They're human beings with brains just like you. They've just been exposed to what, I forget what the name of that press secretary was. She's blonde. She was like the original press secretary before she quit. But she kind of looks old. I can't remember her name. But she used the terminology alternative facts. And basically, facts should be put in quotes, right? Alternative and then facts, because what the left-wing media is presenting as fact isn't 100% factual. What the right-wing media is presenting as fact isn't 100% factual either. So you have people, and depending on what their leanings are, depending on what they are predisposed to, depending on what their background is, if they have liberal or conservative leanings, they turn on the television, right? And one person chooses, CNN, and they are presented with information from what is a, quote, trusted source. And that trusted source presents information that they say this is the truth. Yeah. And so people who consume that version of the truth now behave in a particular way. But on the opposite end of the coin, on the opposite side of the coin, is another American who, instead of maybe flipping CNN for some reason or another, if they are conservative or their background or they're Christian, whatever it is, for whatever reason, They choose, instead of CNN, they choose Fox News and now Newsmax. They are now receiving an alternative version of, quote, true. And in their mind, what they see on Fox News is as true to them as what a viewer sees on CNN. I'm going to say that again. What a viewer sees on Fox News, what they believe is being presented to them as truth, is as true to them. They accept it as true to them, the same way a person who consumes CNN and MSNBC, it's true to them. So you really have to stop before demonizing a person on an opposite end of the spectrum. You really have to understand that it's a human being with a human brain being exposed to two versions of, quote, truth. So you have truths from, and every time I say truths, I'm putting air quotes. So you have truths from the left-wing media, you have truths from the right-wing media, but they're not necessarily true. It's just some version of the truth that is not 100% objective. Both sides are presenting information that is subjective and not 100% truth. Right? So I'm going to keep reiterating this. If a person is consuming media from the right wing, they think that that is true. And as a result, they're going to act on it. So if you have people who are watching Fox News being told that people on the left, Americans on the left, aren't real patriots, hate Americans, are actually socialists. And they trust the source. They trust Fox News, right? And so they believe what the journalists are saying is true because they've also been conditioned that journalists don't lie, that journalists don't have agendas, right? So they're going to trust the station, they're going to trust the talking head that's delivering the information, and they're going to accept the information as true. They are now acting out on what they believe is true, and that is what we're seeing when we turn on the news and you see people on the right, protesting or marching. And on the opposite end, it's the same thing. It's just the opposite end of the coin. It's just the opposite side of the coin. When people on the left-wing media are saying that everyone on the right, every conservative is a racist, Nazi, bigot, who staunchly believes in, is a religious extremist, for Christianity and all that other stuff. They're hearing that, right? And it's not objective, right? It is subjective. The people who are running the show, the people behind the scenes that are telling these anchors what to talk about are human beings with their own agendas, with their own motivations. And this is also a corporate media. There's the financial aspect of this, right? Where it pays to polarize people. It's beneficial for them to polarize people. They are presenting a version of what seems on surface value because you trust the media on the left, because you trust CNN, right? Because we have been programmed from childhood to believe, in authority and the infallibility of authority. And so if a station is presenting itself as an authority on truth, on journalism, on objective, non-biased truth, if you believe that, then you're going to just open your brain and literally download everything that is being told and spoken to you, and you're going to accept that as truth. Now, I'm learning the truth is not objective. And when I say truth, I keep putting truth in quotes, because what we know of to be true isn't really something that we know. A lot of the things that we consider to be true are things that were actually programmed into our minds by external circumstances, right? By external sources, rather, right? I think about the book Lies My Teacher Taught Me, and you can even think back on what you were taught in school, in high school, in your history books, in your textbooks, that as you've gotten older, you've looked back, you trusted your teacher, you trusted the government, you trusted the American educational system. you trusted your textbook. So when you read certain things in your textbook, you didn't challenge, you didn't question what you were taking in. Your brain was open, you downloaded the information, and that shaped your perspective and your behavior. Right? Now as adults, we look back and we think about how, Columbia, for example, Christopher Columbus rather, all this information starts coming out that you weren't taught in grade school, you weren't taught in high school, of how he viewed the natives and how he viewed himself and the horrible, brutal ways in which he interacted with other humans. And even the idea of somebody discovering something that was already occupied by people, and he not even being the first European to set foot in the Americas, that was all a lie. But up until a certain point, you believed that was true. You accepted that as true. Did you know that in World War II, that the Russians suffered more casualties than anybody else? I didn't know that. When I was growing up, when I was educated, I was taught that it was, Americans had suffered and all, like we were the heroes. But what you don't learn is that Russia has played a large part. What I didn't learn was Russia played a very large part in the Allies winning the Second World War, right? But up until I chose to do my own research, right? If I would have just realized, and I'm college educated, it's not that I stopped in high school. So you're talking to somebody who, went through the American education system and then, attended university. I'm still paying my student loans for shit that's not even true. I'm still paying off loans to learn things that turned out not to even be true. So these are the thoughts that I was having today. Truth isn't objective. And once again, I say truth as in quotes. What the majority of people consider to be truth isn't the truth. That's why I put it in quotes. And it isn't objective. It's what you can convince a majority of people to believe. The majority of people believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. There is a small minority of people who don't agree with that. And there's an even smaller group of people who actually know what happened on that day. So I'll say that again. The majority of people believe the truth, quote, that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There's a small minority of people who don't believe that because of whatever, books they've read or information that they've had or just firsthand knowledge. And then there's a very, very small group of people who may not even be alive anymore, but a very, very small group of people, a handful of people who actually know what happened on that day. All right. That information, those people hold the actual truth without quotes, and the majority of people believe truth in quotes. And then I could even take it a step back I could even take it a step further and get esoteric and say, even those people who know what happened on that day perhaps believe in the truth that they were in control. But if you look at things from a philosophical and neurological perspective, scientists have said that we have no control really of what the majority of the things that we do, and that determinism is actually a thing, and that everything that we're experiencing has already happened, is already laid out, and we're just experiencing it. And then, throw in quantum physics, and if you believe this is a simulation, then we're all basically just acting out roles that have already been pre-programmed before your consciousness even entered in the simulation. You see what I mean? It's onions, it's layers, right? There's no absolute truth. We don't really know what we think we know. Another point, what we call history, what we think of as history, isn't really objective, right? It's just tales from the perspective of the winner, the victor, right? And a victor's truth isn't the same as a victim's, right? If somebody breaks into your house, right, and manages to get away with all your things and perhaps kills you, right? The person who broke into your house is going to tell a different story, especially, like, let's say they get caught, right, by the police. They're going to tell a different story than you would have told had you had the ability to tell your story, your truth. And so and that's just human nature, right? You pay attention to the conversations you have with people. Just in regular, everyday conversations, you say something to a family member and then they mishear you or misquote you or misunderstand you. And then there's an argument that happens and then you go, that's not what I said. And they swear on their life that is what you said. And then it goes back and forth and then there's conflict without anybody ever stopping and going, wait a minute, what is going on here? And that continuously is happening. This is continuously happening. When you point the finger and say, look at these people who believe because Trump said that the election was rigged against him. And then you have people who just, if he wouldn't have said that, and he still hasn't presented, from what we're being told anyway, he hasn't presented information that would prove his fact. That's what we're being told, right? And from what I've seen, from what I've read on the court dockets, when they ask, the lawyers, when they're actually there in person in court, hey, is this an actual fraud case that they're alleging? So when the lawyers have something to lose, when their licenses are at risk and they're asked a question, they deviate from what they tell the media. They say, no, we're not actually alleging fraud, which is why a lot of these cases are being dismissed, right? Because the truth quote that they're telling Trump followers, right? We believe this is fraud and we're going to court, is not the same quote truth that they are telling the judges when they're now under oath and they have something to risk and something to lose. But that is hard on the ego who wants to, protect itself, right? So a lot of people really wanted Donald Trump to become, the president again, or she'll win the election in the next, to be president for the next 4 years. Having somebody that you really wanted to lose is already hard enough as it is on the ego, right? The ego, to protect itself, really looks out for things to deny reality, right? Well, the person that I supported didn't really lose, the other party, like, they cheated. And so instead of now having to accept that you lost, going through all these efforts to prove that no, you couldn't have lost, the other party cheated despite what, seems like what appears to be evidence to the contrary, is just the ego's way of protecting itself. And a lot of us do that. We will deny reality in order to protect our own ego. We will deny factual evidence in order to protect our own ego, in order to not feel uncomfortable, in order to not be wrong. The ego will literally put itself in harm's way, put your body, put your psyche in harm's way in order to not be bruised, to protect itself. That's what we're seeing happening now. It's very dangerous if you catch yourself, if you can make yourself conscious when you're in a situation and you are adamantly fighting somebody because you have to be right. You need to stop and pause, because that drive to be right isn't you. That's the ego trying to protect itself. And should you be proven, quote, right, bearing in mind that truth, righteousness, it's not objective. You might think that you're right, maybe because the other person just lost the will to keep arguing with you, so you feel that you're right, but that doesn't benefit you. Being right, especially after an argument, after a contest, doesn't help you. It strengthens the ego, and a strong ego, a strengthened ego, weakens you, weakens your consciousness, puts you further, asleep, so to speak, right? Makes you more reactive, less conscious, right? You don't want your ego to be strengthened. So by winning that argument, you're losing the war within yourself. By winning an external argument with somebody else, you're losing the war within yourself. And you don't want to be a person who is ego-driven, because an ego-driven individual is a slave to their ego. I am learning that truth is not objective. Truth is what you can convince a majority of people to believe. Truth is what you can convince a majority of people to believe. The majority of people believe that George W. Bush, for example, another political example, but hear me out. The majority of people you ask, their truth is that George W. Bush won the election back in 2000. But I did some research, some reading, and I found information that said that isn't the truth. That Al Gore, after it was all said and done, looking back, they found evidence that it was Al Gore who was the actual winner of the election. Majority of people don't know this. So majority of people believe in a truth that isn't necessarily truth. Also going down this path, I saw another article that talked about how there was proof, or there was evidence that John F. Kennedy should not have been president in the first place. That there was, I don't remember what they alleged really, because I kind of glanced over the article, but it was basically saying that the circumstances that saw him become president were, let's just say, fraudulent at best, but sketchy. He should not have been president. Now, you have in your mind what you believe is, American democracy, of, the reason why we are able to go to other countries and invade them is because we operate under this guise of being the world's strongest, infallible democracy. But if you're even paying attention to what's happening right now, our democracy isn't as strong as the people believe, as people think, right? That within itself is a, quote, truth. But you ask the majority of Americans, and the majority of Americans believe that our democracy is infallible. We are the bastion of democracy to the rest of the world. We're not even really a democracy if you really think about it. That within itself, the belief that we are a democracy, is another, quote, truth that the majority of people believe, and the majority of people accept and act upon and defend. And then there's a smaller group of people who know that that's not true. And then there's an even smaller group of people who are actually the ones that are controlling everything. There's layers to this shit. Truth isn't objective. Truth in quotes. Truth is what you can convince a majority to believe. Right now you have a majority of people on the right who, let's say 70 million, 73 million Americans, that's a majority of people, conservatives, who for whatever reason believed, right, the truth, a truth that Donald Trump was the best candidate for them. They believe that truth, and that is, quote, true to to them based on whatever they've watched, whatever they've heard, whatever they've been convinced to believe. And on the opposite end, you have almost 80 million Americans who, for whatever reason, chose Joe Biden as president, right? Because they believe whatever they have been convinced to believe, that he's the best candidate for them. The reason why we don't have active third parties is because people have been convinced of another truth, that to vote third party is to throw away your vote. That's not necessarily true. If you convince the majority of active voters to vote for a third party candidate, then that's no longer true. Question what we accept as true. If you are on the left and you believe X, Y, and Z, ask yourself, why do I believe this? Where did this come from? And why am I fighting so hard to defend this belief? If you're on your right, ask the same question. And then pause, take a step back, and look at the other person, the person on the opposite side, as a reflection of you. I've used that analogy before. I'm going to keep using it because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're all more or less exposed to the same sort of programming, just on the opposite ends, right? So you have left-wing media exposure, you have right-wing media exposure. Ask yourself, why is it that people who primarily watch, Fox News also believe X, Y, and Z, And then ask yourself, why is it that people who primarily watch CNN also believe X, Y, and Z, right? Why isn't there something in the middle? What are you defending? And is what you're defending the actual truth, or truth in quotation marks? There is a quote by Mark Twain. He said, if you, paraphrasing, he says, if you find yourself amongst the majority, pause and take a look. And the majority of people on the left think one way, and the majority of people on the right think one way. If you find yourself echoing the sentiments of the majority of people, pause and reevaluate what you're doing and what you believe and what you consider to be truth. Truth is not objective, not what the majority believe. Truth is what you can convince a majority to believe. I've always played with the idea, it's something that I think about in the shower. I think about the Socratic paradox, where he always said, or I guess Plato said that he said, I know that I know nothing. What I know is that I know nothing. And I always thought, how could the wisest person, theoretically, right? That's another truth that we just accept. Truth in quotes, that Socrates was the wisest, one of the wisest men or whatever, or the wisest man. Western mind. We don't really know that, but a lot of people believe that to be true, hold it to be true. But that's just another quote, truth in quotes. Because in my opinion, I believe Seneca was more wise than Socrates. But that's my opinion. And who knows? And who's to judge? But it was somebody's opinion that has now become truth, right? Opinions get sort of translated into truth, and then we accept opinions as truth and then operate on it. But I always played with the idea of, how can he, what does he mean? He's supposed to be wise, most learned, but it was attributed to, this quote was attributed to him, which said, I know nothing. I know that I know nothing. I know that I know nothing. And for somebody who has prized themselves in accumulating as much, quote, knowledge as I possibly can, it finally dawned on me that what I believe to be knowledge are just opinions of other people. And an opinion is not the same as the truth. I can respect an opinion. It can resonate with me, but to treat an opinion as though it is the absolute truth is dangerous. See, the Bible was written by people who had an opinion about how the world was created. And as a result, you have billions of people who have accepted that opinion as truth, to the point where they have killed and been being killed because of that. If you objectively go and read through the Bible, you will find there's a lot of contradictions that don't make sense if the book was to be written by somebody who, or an entity that is infallible. The biblical God is a description by somebody or a group of people thousands of years ago whose idea of what God was written down. But a lot of people don't pause because they don't pause to evaluate that, right? Because they trust the book, they trust their pastors, they trust their parents who indoctrinated them with a set of ideologies and a set of ideas that stem from this book. And then they defend that as truth. But it's not truth. It's subjective. It's opinion. I ask, how do we know what we think we know is actually the truth? There isn't a lot that we believe that wasn't told to us by somebody else. But then we hold these truths, quote, truths, and then we adamantly defend them without question. There was a time ago when I held a truth in my mind that the biblical God was the only true God, was the one true God. And then as I got older, I said, but how can you say you shall have no other gods before me and that you're the only God? If there's only one planet in the whole solar system, you don't have to profess you shall have no other planets. You shall live in no other planets but this one. Well, yeah, because this is all there is. So by saying you shall have no other gods before me, you are acknowledging the existence of other gods, and then you're saying that you are the one true God. Well, that's an opinion. And if you read in the Bible, you watched or you read characters that interacted with other cultures who believed that their God or gods were was the true God or the true religion, to the point where wars were fought to defend said truths that weren't really true. They were just opinions that people collectively, that the majority was convinced of to believe. What you know is that you know nothing. Nobody knows anything. You got to start by that. We're all born here, butt-ass naked and screaming. The majority of people know nothing. The majority of people believe what other people have told them to believe, and what other people, the people who are going around and telling other people what to believe, are people who are forming their own conclusions based on their observations. But observations and ideas are not necessarily the truth. And like I said earlier in this podcast, there's a large group of people who believe in one version of what they think is true. There is a smaller group of people that challenges that, and then there's a very, very small group of people that actually knows the truth. And I think that that's what you have to remember, that when people on Twitter, people on social media, people on the news professing said, quote, truths, what they're saying And what the majority believe is that one level, all right? It's like an inverted pyramid. Think about the truth as like an inverted pyramid, right? There's this one layer, right, on the top where the majority believe, and that's not necessarily 100% the truth, right? Then there's a smaller layer underneath that where it's a smaller group of people that know that the people above are full of shit and they don't know what they're talking about, right? The people who are telling the people above what to believe are full of shit. Unfortunately, the people in the above group still believe that and are defending said beliefs as truth. But these people in the middle group are looking around and going, that doesn't make any sense, right? And for whatever reason, they're capable of challenging that. And then you have people in the last rung, the very small group of people who actually know the actual truth. And the people who actually know the actual truth are infinitely smaller than the people who think that they know. And that's what you need to remember the next time you catch yourself about to argue with somebody. Pause and do what Socrates did. Say to yourself, I know nothing. What do I know? I'm speculating as much as you, and I don't project your opinions that were based on 30 plus years of programming by external sources as fact. And remind yourself and remind the other person that they're doing the same. There's a quote from the movie Men in Black. This was one of my favorite movies as a kid. The first Men in Black. I watched that so many times that I would quote it verbatim. And it was by Agent K. He sat down with Agent J on the bench. It was like right after he showed him what was really happening in the world, you know. And he said 1,500 years ago, everybody knew, in quotes, right? Everybody knew that the earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew that the earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that humans were alone on this planet. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. Yeah, I posted that quote on Twitter. And somebody responded, they said, you know, all we can do is go with what we know, what's best at the knowledge that we have at the moment. And I said, no, that's not all we can do. We can't just go with what we collectively believe at this present moment. That's just another truth, in quotes, that isn't necessarily true. Galileo didn't go with the best knowledge at the moment, right? He challenged it. That's how humanity evolves. That's how everything evolves. You don't just look around, right? Like if you believe in adaptation, or you don't have to believe it, I guess it is what it is. But if you accept the idea of adaptation, right, or evolution, right, you see that what happens is that, let's just say you have a group of flightless birds, yeah, and for some reason they all have wings, and biologically speaking, they can fly. But what is, quote, the best knowledge at the moment is that the wings that are useless and they have to walk. Okay. All it takes is one individual to look around and go, okay, but what are these things on our arms? Like, what if I do this? Yeah. And then they fly. And then by them flying, they can show the other birds, wait, we can do that too. But if one person, at the very least, one bird doesn't at least challenge what everybody else had just done, then nothing changes, right? They say they don't know why the first amphibian left the water for land, but it only took one, you know. So there was a collective of, you know, species in the water, and then there was one motherfucker that said, well, I don't want to be in the water anymore. So he was just like, fuck this, I'm out. That is how change happens. That is how evolution happens. You challenge conclusions. You challenge preconceived notions. You question everything. You question what you believe to be true, what you think you know. If you catch yourself believing what the majority of people believe, ask yourself if that's the actual truth. I'm not saying stumble down the rabbit hole. I'm not saying conspiracy theorists are right. I think I've kind of proven that what I'm trying to say is that they believe what they believe because they're believing some version of what they think is true. For better or worse. Ultimately, there's some shit that you believe right now. There's some shit that I know I believe right now. That I know one day I'm going to look back and be like, I was wrong. That was not the truth. And you got to be careful, too, of what you allow people to put in your head and what you put in your mind, what you just accept. Keep an open mind, yes, but that mind has to be open both ways. Like if things are going to come in, you also have to let those things go out. And the way you push those things back out is to say, okay, but that's probably, there might be some truth in there, but it's not 100% true. I'm not going to hold on to that. I'm going to challenge that. And I'm going to let it go. You got to look through just at everything. Just everything, for years, for decades, centuries, however, people have just behaved in one particular way. They get up, go to work, come home, eat, fall asleep, do it all again. And then somebody said, I feel like I wasn't born to just live this way, to just pay bills and die. That's a mind that looks around and goes, you know what, that's a truth, right? That's a truth in quotes. Living that way, getting up in the morning, getting in your car, driving to work, sitting in traffic, working a 9-to-5 job so you can come home, live the quote American dream, which is have a house that you probably, can't afford or is above your means, drive a car, have a certain amount of kids and a dog, live that life, retire, move to Florida and die. That's a norm. That's a truth. That is a conditioned behavior, right? That's what the majority of people have been convinced to believe, to accept as true. That doesn't mean that that's how you have to live. That doesn't mean that that's what we were made to do. And you can apply that mindset to anything that could, any ideology that could be oppressive to you. The person that, you're married to. Your definition of what love is. The majority of people believe that love is oppression. In my opinion, that's what it pans out to. Some people view love as oppressive. If you don't believe me, think about it. You fall in love with somebody, all right? And then you go, okay, I don't want you to ever be attracted to anybody ever again because that's disrespectful. You can't look at another woman or you can't look at another man. Just me. Right? Don't talk to anybody. And if you do, that's the end of the relationship. It's over. And that's what the majority of people believe. And so people will literally destroying their lives because of whatever reason. And then on the opposite end too, there are men and women who believe that, they're not fulfilled because they're with one partner. And so they feel like they have to go and seek out other partnerships with other people for whatever reason. But these are truths that were quote, truths that were implanted into their minds from whatever, from music that they may have, inadvertently programmed themselves with. Like, I talked to my cousin, he listens to a lot of rap music, and I said, these lyrics, they're repeating, and the way you program is through repetition. So if you're listening to a lyric that's telling you to, cheat on your man, cheat on your spouse, like there's literally cheat on your man, ma. That's how you get a hizet. That's a lyric. And Drop It Like It's Hot by Snoop Dogg. So you listen to that, and for some people, that gets implanted into their heads, and then they act that out. That's programming. That's a belief. That's a truth that maybe a lot of people believe that. Is that how you get ahead? I don't think so. Is that an ideology that you formulated on your own? No, that's something that came from an external source. Each relationship is unique. It should be. But if you're behaving in a certain way, because of how you've been programmed that the majority of people should behave, and you're living your life in a way that mimics what everybody else is doing, that's one version of the truth. That's that inverted pyramid. That's the top level where, that's one version of truth of how a person should live. Then there's people in the middle, and then there's, the people at the bottom that, believe, that know that it's not. I'm not here to tell you to throw your whole life upside down. I'm saying that empathy, compassion, and the ability to put yourselves in other people's shoes, coupled with challenging your ego, suppressing the ego, maybe not suppressing is not the right word, but recognizing starting from the foundation that we're all equal. And that if you see somebody doing something, you might fix yourself to say, okay, well, I'm better than that person. How? How do you know that if you weren't exposed to the exact same prompts, quote, truths that they are operating on right now, that they are acting out right now, you wouldn't be behaving the exact same way? You would. This ideology of challenging norms is an underlying premise of, I guess, my entire podcast. It's, even the simulation hypothesis. Majority of people right now believe, conventional thought that, either this world was created or, just the Big Bang or whatever. That's what majority of people believe. And so you have majority of people on the left who believe in the Big Bang theory and evolution. You have majority of people on the right who believe that this world was created, and that's that top level. And then you have, let's say 90% of the people in this world who believe that the world was either created by some gods or as a result of a Big Bang explosion. That's the majority of people. And then you have people in the middle, let's say 10% of people who really aren't sure what this world is because of whatever experiences that they've had, either spiritual or esoteric, or they, have done experiments in a laboratory. These are, scientists, who have understanding of physics. They're people who have, knowledge that the rest of us don't have access to. And then there's like 1% of the people who know for a fact, for whatever reason, know beyond the shadow of the doubt what the true nature of this reality is. And I'm arguing that pyramid, that inverted pyramid is, I guess it doesn't have to be inverted, but that pyramid is how you want to kind of start perceiving things, just every idea that you hold as truth. You really need to challenge that. The majority of people who believe, for example, that this world is a result of the Big Bang Theory aren't aware, majority of them aren't aware of something called the Big Bounce Theory, which is an emerging theory about the nature of reality that says that this world never actually had a beginning, that the Big Bang was actually the end of another world's beginning. Does that make sense? So the Big Bounce is basically a world blows up, right? It explodes. You have the Big Bang, and it explodes into being, and then all of reality and civilization plays out, and then at the end there is another bang, and then that bang brings forth another world. And I've talked about this in episodes, I think back this summer when I mentioned doing that TV show interview for the TV show. So that's an emerging theory now, that there's not really a beginning, it's an infinite loop. But that's a scientific premise that people thousands of years ago wrote about in like Tibetan, journals and Hindu scriptures, right? They talked about the same thing, that it's an infinite regress, that the world just keeps on going. There's no beginning. It's like a circle. Where does a circle begin? Where does it end? It doesn't. It's just a loop, right? So there are people who believe that. Then you have scientists like Nick Bostrom and the other guy, Brian Greene, who talk about the fact that, there's we might be living in a simulation, right? And they have math and physics to kind of back up those, their ideas and those theories, right? And they can challenge, based on their firsthand experience, they can challenge people in the majority, the 90% who believe it's either X or Y, because their knowledge is very specific and tells them a certain different type of, quote, truth. Yeah. And then I'm sure there are people out there, out of the 7.8 billion people that exist on this planet right now, there are people out there, 1%, who know without a shadow of a doubt that we truly are in some sort of reality matrix / simulation, right? So just because the majority of people believe something doesn't make that belief truth. Like I've said, truth is not necessarily objective. It's what you can convince the majority of people to believe. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that the majority of people believe on both sides, right? On both sides. So what the majority of conservatives believe, right? What the majority of liberals believe, what the majority of Americans believe, whatever group, what the majority of people believe isn't necessarily the factual truth. It's a subjective truth that, for whatever reason, has to be believed by a group of people to keep society operating in a particular way. Personally, for me, I talk about the simulation hypothesis a lot. My belief about us being in a simulation comes from my own personal experience. It wasn't based on something that I read. I actually have and continue to experience things that on a daily basis make me question the nature of reality. And then from those experiences, I sought out the information from physicists like Brian Greene and Nick Bostrom, and started reading books on quantum physics and reading, about just the history of physics from, Galileo to Newton to Einstein to Schrodinger, all of the above onto the present time. And I'm learning about what they're doing at CERN and things of that nature. But it was my own firsthand experiences that caused me to seek out something to back up my belief, right? Or my own truths, right? To support that, so that when I talk to, other people in the majority of this is what I perceive to be the nature of reality, I can actually back it up with some type of fact, right? And I do believe that 100 years from now, people are going to start perceiving this world differently than how they perceive it now, for better worse. But the quote, imagine what we'll know tomorrow, is what, sticks with me. I think one of the experiences that I've had, especially lately, I've been, I've documented this on the podcast where throughout my life, I've always been kind of plagued with night terrors and sleep paralysis. And psychologically, I've dealt with that. And I no longer have nightmares. And it turns out physiologically, what was causing me to have nightmares was that I have to, literally, the room has to be 65 degrees, cold. I need to be cold when I sleep. If the room is hot, I have nightmares 100% of the time. So it turns out my night terrors were actually just a result of my environment. And though before, leading up to that, when I was deeply religious, I believed a quote truth, that my nightmares were a result of demons or, torment or curses, whatever the fuck, right? That was a truth. And that was a truth that was based on what I was told by external circumstances, what I was told by Christians, what I was told by pastors, what I was told by my family. That wasn't necessarily the truth. I had to come to my own conclusions, running experiences in my own body, throwing out the Bible, researching and finding out that demons aren't real, that hell isn't real. And once I dealt with that, those fears that I had kind of allowed to take root in my brain no longer existed. And then I also realized, it seemed every time I slept and it was hot, I would have a nightmare. So I tested out that hypothesis, and sure enough, when I slept and it was hot, terrible nightmares. When I slept and it was cold, beautiful dreams. So now that's my truth, right? But that's a truth that didn't come from an external circumstance. That was a truth that I developed on my own based on facts. Now, the majority of people, if you ask them, what causes nightmares, they're going to give you their version of the truth. My version of what the truth is what's true to me. And I think that is based on facts, right? If the temperature is hot, I will have a nightmare. Now, what causes nightmare, that's a whole nother truth that I have no idea. What causes my body to create terrifying, images in my sleep, I don't know. And I'm okay to say I don't know. I could ask a psychologist or a neurologist, and they might present to me their version of what the truth is, what they think is causing that. But at the end of the day, that's just opinion. One of the reasons why I think we're in a simulation, just one of the many examples, is my dreams. So what happened was, I guess I have just a very active dreamscape. And so what happened was, because I was no longer creating, maybe not because, but I went from creating nightmares, from my brain creating nightmares, which are, emotional, but it was like a negative emotion, to creating lives and stories. And I think about 2-3 nights a week, I live whole lives. It's a little heartbreaking, actually, because more and more, every time I go to sleep, it's I know I'm going to a different world. And I'm not having lucid dreams, so I'm not lucid dreaming at all, but they're incredibly vivid to the point where it's not just what I see, but it's what I feel. I've had dreams where I've been married to people, and in the dream, I feel the same love that I feel for my husband in my waking life, and you feel compassion and you feel attachment and desire and all of those things. So much so that when I wake up, it takes me a while. It takes me a while for my body, my physiology, to shake off the emotion that was brought up from the dream. One night, I think I normally set the AC to 65, and I had a dream that was so it was so bad. It was a nightmare, but it wasn't about demons or anything like that, because I no longer believe in demons. But it was about loss of a loved one, and of course it was hot. The AC, I doubled my blanket, and the AC just didn't kick on, so my body was hot. I woke up in a sweat. I was sweating, so my body in the room was muggy and it was hot. But I woke up crying, and I knew it was just a dream, because the person that I dreamt of that I had lost was obviously laying right next to me. And I knew it was just a dream. So that aspect of, okay, you're just dreaming, came to me in a rush as soon as I opened my eyes. But I couldn't stop my body from emotionally reacting. And I was crying. I mean, I was like proper tears. My head knew, okay, it's just a dream. Just wait for your body to like wake up. But my body was still reacting to what it was feeling and had felt in the dream. Now imagine that was just, one bad dream, but this is happening to me 2-3 times a week now. I've had children. I had 2 kids one dream, and they were beautiful children. And as I spent time with them, we went on trips, and I went on sailing on a boat with my kids or whatever, in this weird world where people sailed around in boats or whatever, and like they lived, it was like Venice almost. And then as I started waking up, there was a part of me that began to mourn, because I knew I'm never going to see these kids again, because it was just a dream, And as you're coming out of it, your psyche, it resonates with you. Okay, I'm coming into this reality now, but that you still feel the sadness and the loss, and I'm losing them. This is happening to me 2-3 nights a week now. And what that's teaching me is that, if I can form these emotions to what is more or less appears to be, I should say, quote, figments of my imagination, how do I know that that very same thing isn't happening in this reality, in this waking world that appears to be real, right? So that's just one example. And if you're wondering like why all of a sudden I'm now having these sort of dreams, I think 2 things. One, I have started microdosing mushrooms. One microdose that I take, it's once a week. Not even once a week, maybe like once every 2 weeks. I take just like a cap of a dried like magic mushroom. I'm not encouraging you guys to do this. But 1 cap of magic mushroom, and I take it because it helps stabilize my anxiety. And 1 is usually enough for like a couple of weeks, and I start feeling myself, getting more depressive, and it balances me out. And I just take 1 little cap, sometimes a couple of stems, whatever, every couple of weeks. That's enough for me. That's what I mean by microdosing. Like it's a microdosing. And I'm very sensitive, so that's how it affects me. I also started taking, there's this mushroom. I cannot, unfortunately, remember the name right now. Maybe I'll remember in another episode. But I went to the eye doctor, and he said I had issues with like what he thinks I might have like pressure in my eyes. And so I found this mushroom tincture that is supposed to help reduce pressure in your eyes. And for some reason, I take it right before bed. And for some reason, that with a combination of having the mushrooms in my system, the magic mushrooms in my system, has made my dreams that much more vivid. That's what I think, right? That's my truth, because those are the 2 new things that I've started doing. It may be different for you, more or less. But yeah, having those firsthand experiences to me are like clues, along with some other synchronistic experiences that I have, where like I'll say something, and then like as I'm saying it, the TV echoes exactly what I'm saying at the same time, to the point where like my daughter is like noticing this now, and she like is like calling it out, and it's really weird. So those kind of things keep happening to me. So that's why my truth is my truth. If I tell 90% of people that we're living a simulation, they're gonna say I'm crazy. And I don't go around telling 90% of people that, we're living in a simulation. But my conclusions are supported. I should say I have come to the same conclusion as scientists whose conclusions are supported by their own research and mathematics and experiments and things of that nature as well. So, yeah. All right, guys. As always, thank you for listening. One more thing, I will say, to reiterate, it's important to keep an open mind and not judge. Watch the ego. It's another thing is when your mind is open to let things in, be mindful to also keep the mind open to let those things out. As easily as you let things flow in, you should also let them flow out, and know that the majority of people are operating on premises that are not actual truth. All right. Thanks for listening. Take care.